Hey, Scott! Welcome to the Secret Sesh. I am thrilled and honored to be session with you today.
Bean, thanks so much for having me. This is great. I've been looking forward to it.
Me too. So we're gonna make this a true secret sesh right off the top. I'm powering up my packs right now. We do not hit pause on these. You just gonna catch up if you're not ready. I mean, I can't stop you from
Very
hitting
good.
pause, but like, what up, Scott?
Well, I went down to my local dispensary and picked up a pre-roll. This is an enhanced one, they said. So I'm not sure what it's enhanced with, but we'll find out very soon. But I've been practicing all night, so I should get it right.
I've been
But
practicing for many decades at this point. All
but
right.
I have to ask, and I have a PAX, but I've lent it to a friend, and you know how that goes. So I need to get a second one, and those are really cool. I really like them. But as someone who's written a book on it, what's the proper way to light a joint?
Oh, well, interesting. Hold on. Let me get a.
Yeah, because I don't want to, get kicked out of the club.
As long as it works, it's proper. But I usually hold the joint,
Yeah,
light the end, and kind of let the end burn, especially if there's a little paper on the end.
yeah, there's
It's not going to
something.
hurt you, but you don't want to inhale paper, especially your first puff. So just get it a little lit that way, and then make sure that first draw is nice and even, and see how it lights up for you.
Well, next party I go to, I want to be able to brag and say I got it straight from the authorities. All right, let's try this.
It might take a couple of little short puffs to
Yeah.
get it going. And now maybe try one puff while you. There. Oh. How's that? Yes.
Perfect. We
Success.
are in. All right, we have sound, we have video, we have reefer. Let's move on.
Right on. So Scott, tell me a little about. We want to know everything about you. Well, maybe not everything, but tell me a little bit about your weed journey.
This is the first joint I've ever had in my life. It's great. I feel really weird. I'm serious. So I guess
Your
you know
your t-shirt makes me suspect otherwise, but go
well,
on.
we'll get into that in a little bit. But you know, I first of all I got to say thanks to you and putting up this great program and this platform for people to sort of take off the skin a little bit, and peel it back and see what's underneath, and that's always a good thing. So thank you, and I thoroughly enjoy all the episodes, and I recommend everybody go through and listen to all of them. So my journey goes back. I'm a typical sort of suburban kid, grew up in the Midwest. It's my story's not too unusual, but there's some fun within those early times. And I guess I was way more into weed than most kids. And even before I'd even tried it, I knew about it. I'd read some High Times and listened to some Cheech and Chong, and but I hadn't tried it yet. But once I tried it, it was like okay, and I don't want to say how old. That was quite young, but I'm 58. I was born in 1965, so I was sort of at the end of the hippie stuff, and right before the just say no. So I was kind of getting the Carter years, and it was on its way to some legalization,
So this is
and
the era where Willie Nelson was smoking a joint on the roof of the White House. We're talking
yeah,
about late
yeah, absolutely,
70s, sure.
absolutely. So you had an episode about the hippie trail. And I was thinking, well, at that time we didn't have any hippie trails, but we had to go across town to get the weed. We had to cross through neighborhoods. We had to go around through the woods. Then we had to get back with the weed, once we got it. And so it was always a journey, to find it. We'd stop by and skateboard at the drainage ditch and all that fun stuff. But the really cool thing, or a couple of cool things, one of the early things that I remember is going to a friend's house, and I don't have that many great, super fabulous tales about it, but we did go to a friend's house once, and there were a bunch of guys, and most of them were older, and this was the only time I had ever heard this, and I was really kind of scared when I heard it. But this older guy walked in the room. I don't know, he was probably 19 or maybe way older. I don't know, but he's like, "Hey, you guys want to smoke some grass?" And I was like, I'd never heard anybody say grass before. And it was like, wow, somebody said grass and we want to smoke it. So it was one of those moments where, it was a discovery, a moment of discovery. But the other cool thing I remember about that is being able to enjoy the fruits of a double bubble. And I don't know if they still have many of those, but those are always nice. If somebody had the double bubble. But I only saw one time uh, somebody had some Acapulco gold, and it was actually gold. It was like wow. But that was the only time I saw any kind of exotic, weed or anything like that.
Well, let's unpack a couple of things in this early weed interaction. One, that sort of journey just to find cannabis in the pre-legalization, pre-dispensary era. There's so many terrible parts of prohibition, of course, and it's like we don't need to go into all of that. We're having a fun secret sesh, but we all know that prohibition is terrible. But that adventure of finding cannabis can often be some of the most fun parts of it. It brings weed crews together. If you think of the episode on our program about the Waldos who invented 420, well, they were trying to find weed. If you look at the episode about the Choom Gang, which was former President Obama's weed crew, weed crews form for to enjoy weed together, but a lot of the adventure in it is in the finding. How the journey is half the fun. And then when you name check Acapulco Gold, that takes us back to sort of the end of the era of cannabis being imported into the country primarily from places like Acapulco, which is in Mexico, or Punta Roja came from Colombia, and even as far away from as Thai stick from Thailand. Before the homegrown movement in the U.S. and before all these hybrid strains, these were very, very distinct land-raised cannabis strains that were around, and I'd say you were pretty fortunate to catch the tail end of some
Well,
Acapulco Gold.
it was kind of fun, and it was the cultural shift. It was being part of that cultural shift and witnessing that because as I said, it was like the last time I heard anybody say grass. In a non-jokingly way.
Yeah, it's
So
become an ironic, kind of throwbacky term. But I still gotta say, the nature of my work as a weed historian, I talk to a lot of elders about weed, and I'm
yeah,
talking about people in their 80s, 70s, and 80s as our elders, and I've never met anybody who called it grass who wasn't cool. You know what I mean? And I don't mean cool
yeah.
like Hollywood celebrity cool. I mean like just a cool person that you're going to have a good time hanging out with and that's got a good vibe. So I'm
Yeah,
always
this was
happy to
this
hear it.
guy. That was the same guy. He just kind of he was really smooth and laid back and was like, "Yeah, I want to smoke some grass with that dude."
Ooh.
So we smoked grass. Well, moving forward, I just want to say, I went on and off. I kept getting busted. Just like anybody. And it's like, gosh, gosh, again, and just stupid things. And it's like, I'm just going to stop. And so I did for several years. But, I look back on that and it's like, just stupid things. And you got, just, it's bad all around. But anyway, I won't get into that right now, but move forward several years. And so I got away from it for a little while. And, you know, uh, I wasn't sure what to think of it because, when I would in college, isn't that the place where it's legal
Mhm.
to, to learn about weed? Uh, I'd get too high and it's like, yeah, this is not that much fun. I didn't know what I was getting, and so there's another the prohibition thing is, you go to a store now, you can say, oh, I just want the 5 milligram gummy, or, give me the big one. So that's what I think what I was missing in those days. So
And I
a
will
few
say, I
years
will
after
say,
that,
I will say also, like, there's an element of cannabis can bring up anxiety for people, including myself, many decades into this. Sometimes it is
nobody wants to
because,
get too high.
yeah, sometimes it's because cannabis will, bring up thoughts or feelings that your conscious mind is not trying to deal with. But also, if you've gotten busted once, if you've gotten busted several times, that's not part of the plan. That's not
No.
inherent in the experience. That's lived experience. And so, much of the cannabis makes you paranoid, uh, you know, thinking out there, well, yeah, but I did get arrested for this. My friend got arrested, and so, I sympathize with that experience. And I think, really another great thing about ending prohibition and unraveling this terribly oppressive system is that people can experience this wonderful and medicinal plant without that threat hanging over them, and it's going to change the nature of that experience for people.
Well, I knew early on that it was the laws and not the plant itself that was a real danger. So I just got tired of that. It's embarrassing after a while. It's like, you bring your parents in, it's all this. So I was happy to know when I got out of that and I started, consuming again as an adult. It was a really interesting, just, and it's probably not that unusual with a lot of people. But around 1999, I was living in Denver and had already kind of jumped into the scene there. I'm a musician. And so they have a tendency to, find other smokers, tokers. And so, I was 34 and I was visiting some family in St. Louis and I started having grand mal seizures. I was like, well, this kind of upset the cart a little bit. So uh, it set me kind of spinning a little bit. Well, I had already known, I'd read the Jack Herer book, and I had that, before this. And I was like, well, I kind of know about epilepsy and seizures, so I'm leafing through there. I'm like, uh huh, right there. So right away, I just became, I don't want to say an activist, but certainly a proponent of what was going on medicinally. And so that led me back into it. And then I eventually kind of got everything gathered back up, and it took a couple of years. I didn't drive for a couple of years, and I kept having some smaller seizures and all this, but I kept learning about it, and I made it back out to Colorado. This time I moved to Fort Collins. And so I was able to get some medicine, some cannabis that worked for me, and eventually the seizures ended. So that's kind of the pre story to what's coming up. So
Yeah,
around,
let me just for the sake of the timeline,
yeah,
what I think is really interesting is uh, a lot of the discussion around cannabis and treating seizure disorders, which is a range of different disorders that can result in seizures. Uh, a lot of people would pin that to around 2008 when chief medical correspondent for CNN, Dr. Sanjay Gupta, did a special on that. And particularly, he was looking at seizure disorders with children. And that is fantastic. And that special had a huge effect in spreading that knowledge. And we salute Sanjay Gupta for doing that special and for admitting that he had been part of the problem. That got
absolutely.
glossed over a little bit, is that he said, I have been part of this huge failure of the medical community to take not just this medicine seriously, but in his words, not exact quote, the many, many patients who came to me and told me that this was working for them. And I just have to highlight that you were having this experience a full decade earlier, and you were had learned about it in a book that was published a decade before that. And of course, please do check out our episode on the late, great Jack Herrer, rhymes with terror, in the podcast feed. But this is having a big benefit for you. So tell me
Yeah.
more.
Well, about that time, I guess we'll pick it up as a timeline. The Cole memo came out. Was it 2009 or 10 or something like that? Anyway, when that happened in Colorado, all these dispensaries just opened, just like this. And it was a free for all. And where I was living, there were probably, a dozen just popped up overnight. And the funny thing about it is, it was coming out of the legacy market. So there was just this whole wide different, you know, plethora of different types of places to go. There would be some, just places that were a dump, and then others that were in these cool old houses. And it was just a real, it wasn't, just everything in a package. And you could smell it, a mile away going in. Well, the city got a hold of that in Fort Collins, and they're like, we're going to close this down, So they did a weird mid uh, between cycles, mid-cycle election, and they voted out all the dispensaries. So that started a whole group of folks to put it back on the ballot and get it voted back in. And that's where I want to jump in and say, I met some really, really, really cool, hardworking people who put in just countless hours and tireless hours to do just some horrible work that nobody really wants to do. And I have to take my hat off to some of these folks. I'll get to my hat here in a minute because there's a lot of stories behind the hat. Anyway, so I got involved with the program there to get it back on the ballot, and then of course 64 was part of that too. And there were couple of different elections. There's probably somebody watching who knows a lot more about the timeline. I may know some folks who are there as well. So uh, it was exciting because volunteering for this, and I did a whole bunch of different things. And one of the things that I did was take some of my passions and try to incorporate it into the volunteering. And one of those was juggling. And so I'm a juggler, and I've been juggling, for years and years and years. And, it's like, okay, well, it's something I love to do. How can I incorporate this into my thing? And so the first thing I did was there was a homecoming parade, and the Yes on 64, and I think Yes on 301. I think that was the number. I have to look at it. They had a homecoming parade, and we had a float, and we did the whole thing. And I would look back and I'm so proud that I didn't drop a single time going through the whole parade. So it was a lot of fun. But I juggled in a whole bunch of different ways, and I have to say, I did wear the hat every time I juggled. So I have to wear my colors here. So I juggled in the parade. I made it through. I didn't drop once. It was great. The second time I juggled was a super time. It was fun because there was I guess, a volunteer office downtown, and you go in there and make calls and do whatever. Well, during the time when they voted it out, all the dispensaries were closed, and so there was one that was open. They weren't selling anything, but it was open, and it was a rally for the election coming up. And Gary Johnson stopped in, former presidential candidate Gary Johnson. And I juggled for Gary Johnson, and I was so happy that I didn't drop for Gary either. So that was a lot of fun there. And then another fun story that came out of the 64 thing was when I was there one day, and I think it was toward the end of before the election, uh, feeling confident. Everybody's, uh, feeling confident about it. Polling numbers were good and all this. And so, uh, I was at the office, and I got a couple of those yard signs, the yard signs, and you put them in your yard. And I was on my bike, and I'd ride downtown and ride back home. Well, I'm like, well, let me put a couple of those signs on the bike. So I did. I strapped them on there and put one on each side. I had my hat. I put in my backpack, my juggling stuff in the backpack, and so I'm like, all right. So I'm tooling around town, just kind of hey, 64, all this stuff, and people are honking, and yeah, all this stuff, and I'm just kind of feeling real proud about myself. So I get on and I go south there out of downtown. I think it's on Remington. I think is the name of the street. Probably still the same. Anyway, I'm starting to go and I'm going a little faster and a little faster, and all of a sudden the signs start kind of lifting up off the bike, and I'm riding along. It's like, whoa, 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 and I slow down a little bit and they kind of go down. I'm like, all right, well, it comes to stop now. So I start going again, I'm going again. And all of a sudden the signs are going back up again. They're sort of flopping and flipping. I'm like, shit, what do I do? And the faster I went, the more they'd flop. I slow down. I was like, all right, damn it. So I pulled over. I'm like, all right, well, let me try to tie it down a little bit more. And, I tried to tie it and I'm like, all right, let's do this. And I did it a little bit more and it just keeps coming up and they're flapping in the wind and I'm riding and cars are like honking, and all this. And so I get to one point, I'm just like, no, I'm just going to ride hard. So I did. And those signs are just flapping in the wind like that. So I get near home and I was coming up a hill and of course they're down. Another car comes up, and I turned around to look at the car, and sure enough, my hat like pops out of my backpack, and it flies off.
Uh,
It flies off into the other direction. I'm like, shit. I just my whole ego just got squashed by by the wind and by this stupid thing. So I made it home. I tied the thing down. I secured it down, and the next day was, I don't know, maybe the next day or two was the election. And so I got up early. The thing was secured. I put the hat in the thing tightly, had my juggling stuff. I went to the polling place, which was a church, and it was maybe, I don't know, a mile or two away. And so I rode my bike again, and got there. And, there was a pretty good crowd there. I tried to get there early. And so there was the line, where the polling is like, no solicitors past this line. I set up, it was right where it needed to be. And, folks were coming in. I'm juggling, I got my hat on. Hey, yes, I'm 64. Yes, yeah, and all this stuff. And sure enough, I'm standing there and I look over and the minister's walking out. He's walking right toward me. I'm like, oh man. I'm like, did I say something wrong? I'm thinking, okay, great moments in weed history. Let's see, Jesus, where is it in the Bible? All these things. And he comes over and he's just like, hey, how you doing there? What's going on there? And I'm like, yeah, pretty good. I'm just doing, I'm behind the line, all this stuff. And we just kind of talk a few minutes. And one point he kind of leans in. Hey man, got any weed? I'm like, whoa, whoa, not going there today. And no, he didn't say that. But we kept talking a little bit more. It was all right. And then he leaned in again. I'm just kidding. I got a big joint here. Why don't you meet me at the rectory after a couple hours? But no, he didn't say that either. So it went off well. But it was a nice guy, and I met a lot of nice people. There was some another candidate running, and I got to say, there was just a lot of really nice people.
Yeah,
And then
I think that's like a huge takeaway from the kind of and here it comes grassroots level activism that you're describing and that you're involved in is yes, you are working on unraveling this terrible authoritarian oppressive system, and it's an extremely serious issue. And then when you talk about people being denied a life-saving medicine, that's a very serious issue. But you're going to meet people that you're going to have a connection with, and you're going to have fun. Any real successful campaign to change the world for the better has to have its element of fun, and has to have a social element, and has to have, to some extent, attract the attention of the public. So, things like the hat and juggling and just riding down a street with signs flapping behind you. There was an air to it, especially, Colorado was the one of the first two states to vote on full legalization for adults. And putting, going back to that time, there was a real novelty element of it. And what the campaigns allowed, in addition to um, getting the vote out and getting the word out, was it gave a lot of people an opportunity to be honest about themselves and to say, wow, okay, if that guy's out there in a parade juggling, maybe I can have a difficult conversation with my family, or maybe I can be more honest about this with the people I play softball with. And, for everybody who becomes sort of a dedicated out front activist, you create a lot of space for people. And it's almost like looking back now, we've been so, many states still suffering under prohibition, of course, but it's almost hard to remember how difficult it was, and in some cases how frightening it was, to just simply be honest about this. And so, what your conversations take me back to is that, I'm going to say, heady time. Um, and then, of course, if you want to hear sort of the inside uh, track on that campaign and on that vote, we have an episode of this program where we interview Wanda James, who was a leading proponent of the Yes on 64 campaign, and who was also at that time, the first, as far as I'm remembering correctly, the first black business owner in the cannabis industry, certainly in Colorado, and given that Colorado was the first state, in the United States. So these big campaigns, are that's the other thing we have on our side is, weed is so important personally to so many people that when we create the space and the permission and the opportunity for people to show up for us, they will, versus, oh, should there be a condo zoning board allocation so that, this company, they're not, they pay people to come out and hold signs, because
Yeah.
nobody cares. Whereas we've been able to mobilize our community because of people like yourself who are going to literally raise the flag for it. So,
Well,
thank
it
you
was
so much.
well, sure. It got really interesting after that. And we'll turn the page on Colorado because we know what happened there. And it's kind of weird because the next day after the election, it was like, yeah, yeah, yeah. But pretty soon, the editorials disappeared. The signs came out of the lawn, just like any other political campaign. And sun came up and went down, and everything went on as normal. Well, a couple of years after that, I moved to Kentucky, and I didn't know much about Kentucky. It was far away from Colorado. I knew they once grew hemp there in a lot of big ways, but beyond that, I wasn't too familiar with their cannabis policy. Well, I got there thinking, oh, I'm just going to saunter in and just tell them what to do. And I'm going to say, this is how you legalize cannabis, and I'll show you right now. So that didn't happen. But what I did do was I was able to meet some really, really cool people. One of the first people I ever met, they had a meeting at the Kentuckians for medicinal marijuana. Jaime and Eric and Michelle are some of the folks I met, are just tireless efforts to put forth some legislation. They were the first ones I met, and they gave me the names of some other people, and I met some other people, and then there was a trip to the Capitol. And the first one, it was a rally to the Capitol, and it was like, oh man, it's a little different from Colorado, and their hearts were there, and it was like everybody's, but it was they didn't have the resources that they had in Colorado, and they didn't have the momentum. The crest of the wave was still, behind a little bit, and so I realized that there are a lot of rocks, a lot of boulders to move here. So it was like a totally different approach, and even though I think most people were probably for it, it was a totally different mindset, and it took a little while But one of the first things I did was I reached out to the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, set up an appointment. Surprised he saw me, went in there and actually visited with him twice, and eventually got to where he was a pretty nice guy. We had a good time talking. But Senator Westerfield was he was the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee at the time, and as I said, it was willing to listen, but the political climate is so much different than anything I was used to, and I did my best, and I wrote just tons of emails and letters. And one other fun thing that I did that was a whole experience in itself was, I guess this was around 2016, 17, 18, somewhere in there. Well, one of these organizations, either Kentucky Cannabis Freedom Coalition, Patrick and Jennifer run that one, or the KY, or the Kentuckians for Medicinal Marijuana. Either way, we were trying to gather folks to send out to some of these smaller communities to have them enact proclamations saying that they are in favor of medical cannabis, and this is, something to take to Frankfurt to say, hey, look at all these people, let's get this rolling. Pardon me. Uh, so I was like, okay, well, I didn't go where I was living in Berea, little town, but I went south about an hour to London, Kentucky. And this is right on the edge of Appalachia. It's just right at the foothills, and you just kind of go a little bit that way and you're in the hills. And it's real pretty down there too. But I called ahead of time, city council. I'm like, yeah, I want to come down and talk about cannabis to the city council. And I had done this, or I had been to several city council meetings in Fort Collins. So I was like, it's like, oh, it'd probably be the same kind of thing. It wasn't. So I get down there and, I check in, and it's down in the basement of this kind of, well, it's a city hall, but it was an older building, small building, down in the basement. It was just kind of this little room. And I go in there, and there's, a table, a semicircle where the city council was. And I sit there in like second row or so, and I'm just kind of waiting around. And a lot of people are starting to file in, and I'm thinking, oh, because before I came down, they put it on social media that, there's going to be some people at the city hall, so come on out, So I'm thinking, no, this is my crowd here showing up, but nobody's like reaching out to me saying, hey, how you doing? We heard about you on social media. So I wasn't first on the agenda, which was probably a good thing. It was I don't remember the details, but it had something to do with stop signs and frontage roads and some disgruntled neighbors, and there was lots of going back and forth. Good discourse, but it was like, yeah, it was one of those. So I get finally I get up, and I get up and I talk and I say my thing, and I'm like, yeah, and they ask me a couple questions, and it's very cordial. And so after it's done, I finish, I turn around, I leave, and I look at some of the people who are there, because I was afraid to kind of turn around when they were screaming and yelling. And so I get out and I'm walking down the hall, and somebody behind me says, hey, excuse me, excuse me. And I turn around, and there's some guy and I guess his wife who was with him. And we go outside, out to the back of the building. And he's like, yeah, I heard about you on social media. And this guy he was not in good shape. He was probably near 70. He had a cane, and he was a Vietnam vet. And he's like, I've been watching you guys, and I want to give all the support I can. And I'm like, man, that is so, just brave and just courageous of you to do what you're doing, to come out to this kind of thing. He was the only one, other than myself, that showed up. And so it was very encouraging, despite all the arguments about frontage roads, that somebody came out and was, excited about that. So it was encouraging as well. So I really enjoyed all that time. And again, there were so many people putting in so much hard work, and there's
Yeah.
a lot of great folks.
Yeah, I just want to return to that point there's sort of a stuck pickle jar paradigm when it comes to political action, to really changing things, which is, obviously every time somebody comes along and just easily opens the pickle jar, there's a lot of people who said, well, I think I loosened it. And each tiny act, each single individual that you bring into the fold of activism, each action that you yourself take, it's very rare that we actually get to see the pickle jar come off. But without the cumulative force of all of those actions, or as you described, talking to a politician who seemed very nice and, listened to you, but didn't do what you were asking to, it can be very frustrating because when you know the facts about cannabis, it's a very one-sided issue. Should we be caging human beings for growing or consuming or sharing a medicinal plant? Well, no. And there's many facts to lay on the table. So it can be very frustrating to have that kind of a conversation with somebody in power who has the actual power to change things and not see the immediate result that you're hoping for. But even on a human level, you are loosening the pickle jar of that person's either ignorance or unwillingness to act. And when the time comes and the conditions are right for that change to happen, it will only be so because of all of this. It's not really a pun, grassroots political action that preceded it. And so, anyone listening to this and living in a prohibition state, it is still difficult to have these conversations. I think it must be a lot easier because you can now point, in the campaign in Colorado, there was no other state to point to. And so there was a big opportunity to scaremonger. I think now in other states, you can point and say, look at these examples. But in the states that have still not legalized, there's a reason. It's because there is a hostility to not just cannabis, but to a whole range of ways of life, that is not based on facts and is not based on good public policy. It's based on a kind of ignorance or worse. And so I would just say to anybody in those states, feeling that frustration, you really have to look at it that way, that every effort you make, whether you see a direct effect or not, is just putting your life force. We all have a limited amount of life force on this earth, and we have to decide how to allocate it. But if you can put some of your life force towards opening that pickle jar, it will one day open. And what it's full of is not just pickles and vinegar, but people not getting arrested, cancer patients having access to medicine that they need. It's the jar has maybe a good job for you in it. It certainly has some tax revenue that the government can hopefully spend on good things and not the fucking cops. And it is inherent on all of us to do that. And I thank you in particular for doing that, Scott, for sharing some of those stories with us, for helping to spread that message. And before I'm gonna re-up on my sesh one more time. And I kind of want to hear before we go about your life as a live performer and maybe how cannabis influences your creativity as a live performer.
Well, I'm all choked up. Pardon me. Here, what I'll do is I'll sing a song. Can I do that for you?
I think you can play us out, Scott.
Pardon her. All right. Well, that would be one thing that I don't know if you can see that too well.
Yeah.
That I would stress is that take whatever passions you have, and for me, it's music and juggling, and figure out a way to incorporate it into uh, moving something forward that's something you feel very passionate about. And I think it makes it a little easier, and and you're bound to meet people like you, and it makes it a whole lot easier. Can you hear that all right?
Yeah, it sounds good.
Well, if there's one good thing about cannabis, it's got to be about a million or more. If there's two good things about cannabis, it's got to be about a trillion or more. Good for your head, good for the soil. Pile it on your plate, makes really good oil. There's one good thing about cannabis, got to be about a million or more. It's always funny what the Fed says. Any other president, they're just courting status quo. But if you listen to your heart and you look into your soul, you find the very best in everything, in every joint you roll. There's one good thing about cannabis. You gotta be about a million or more. There's two good things about cannabis. Got to be about a trillion more. Good for your head, good for the soil. Pile it on your plate, you can turn it into oil. Some call pot, some call reefer, some call marijuana, even in a leap year. Da 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 da. Do 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 do. La. Good vibrato there. La. Do 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 do. Da 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 da. Da da. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Scott. I'm going to assume that song is called A Million Good Things About Cannabis. That's what I'm going to call it anyway.
And it's called Don't Ever Take Yourself Too Seriously.
Yes, indeed. Well, that is a fantastic way to close out this secret sesh. If you, listening, watching, seshing along at home, would like to secret sesh with me, please contact me through the DMs on Patreon or send me an email, info@greatmomentsinweedhistory.com. I thank you all so much for supporting this podcast, for supporting the effort to preserve cannabis history. It's such a pleasure to get to meet Scott, yourself, and all of the secret sessions and see who is out there listening. And it really inspires me to put a face to the void, to have some new friends among everything else good that's come out of this show for me. To feel like I've made a bunch of new friends, and everybody is up to so much interesting weedy stuff, and it's all because of you supporting the show on Patreon. I will see you all very soon next weed on Weedness Day for an all new Great Moments in Weed History. Scott, such a pleasure hanging with you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Bean. Appreciate it.